Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the App Clinic. This week we are looking at sleep monitoring and recording apps. My regular colleague Ian Lewis has been hard at work testing these out, and unfortunately that means he is currently sleeping. So we're going to hopefully get some of his input on some of these apps a little later in the program if he's able to arouse himself from sleep and give us some of his insight. Now that's just how important we take our jobs here at the App Clinic. We're willing to sleep during the day on a Friday just so that we can give these apps the appropriate attention that they deserve. So we're going to look at 3 apps today. They are Sleep as Android, Circle Alarm, and Sleep Recorder. And they all basically are designed to do the same thing. So they're designed to help you get a good night's sleep. Now certainly the first and last of these two, which we're going to look at, are designed specifically as sort of your own private sleep study. You get the device, you put it on your bed, and it measures vibrations using the sensors to see how good a night's sleep you're getting, whether you're twisting and turning, moving around, or whether you're just lying there in comatose bliss. The middle app, Circle Alarm, is a little bit different. It's actually an alarm clock, essentially, which we looked at these a little while back. It was still the 3rd highest rated app in the category this week, so we are going to take a look, but it is a little bit different from the other two. We're going to spend a little bit more time on those apps. So, getting started. What do we really want from these sorts of apps? Well, what it really comes down to is we're looking for something which is really easy to use.
Sorry about that, my fault.
That's all right. It's always fun to have moving things. Now it says profile, device profile wish list at the top. It's not. It's actually the sleep monitoring wish list. That's my lack of preparation getting in the way there. But really, what I want is something which I can start up, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. I think you can get a lot of the requirements for an app like this, which is basically it's a tracking app. In this instance, it's tracking your sleep. But a lot of the same learnings and sort of optimizations are going to be very similar to what we looked at a few weeks ago when we were looking at fitness tracking apps. So like those apps like Endomondo, Runkeeper, Runtastic, you want something that's relatively easy to get going, which doesn't take a lot of attention, but then has rich analytics once you've used it, so that you're able to sort of get started, record things really easily, and then spend your time analyzing the results at your leisure. So the first app that we're going to take a look at today is Sleep as Android, and you can see here they've got a feature graphic. Whoops, I skipped ahead of myself. They have a feature graphic here, which is along the right lines. It's a little noisy, and what they've done here is they've done sort of a classic mistake, and they've used the feature graphic as a place to put all of their screenshots. Now there is a place for screenshots on the landing page, so you don't need to put them into your feature graphic. Now the big reason for not doing that is that when this gets shrunk down into a tiny size on a phone for one of our smaller feature slots, it's going to become basically a mess. You're not going to be able to see these screenshots, you're not going to be able to make out any of this detail. So it becomes messy and not something which we're likely to feature. And similarly, if you're just sort of browsing here, all of the information that you've got there on the feature graphic, the name, the screenshots, are all available elsewhere. So I think you almost want to focus just on what they've got here, and maybe try and make that more of the feature graphic. You really want to give people a vibe, a feel for the app, rather than trying to cram all of your advertising material all in one place. Similarly, they've done a reasonably good job with their icon here. It's distinctive. Has a distinctive silhouette. It's perhaps not quite stylized enough. It does tend to lose some of its impact when you get the smaller icon, but it's definitely along the right lines. So definitely good work, maybe a little bit more work to be done here. So moving on, once you get the app going, and I'm going to do that on my phone as well, but you can see here straight away that they've got sort of the right idea. It's got a modern looking UI. It's kind of hollow-ish. It's not quite hollow. It's not quite an action bar. And that's one of the things which I really want to highlight for these guys is you can see in particular on the pseudo action bar that they've got along the bottom, the alignment isn't quite right. So they've got the overflow icon that looks right, but it's not quite in the right place. And so you really want to think about, if you're going to use some of the common UI paradigms within the platform, it's really important to use them in a way that's consistent with other apps using the same controls, the same paradigms. Where it really gets confusing if it's something that looks kind of like something that you're expecting, but doesn't quite work in the same way or produces slightly different results or is laid out slightly differently. That just causes confusion. So you're almost better off doing something completely unique if you want to do any sort of significant variance on one of the existing UI pieces. Similarly, we've got the little icon on the bottom right, which is kind of cute, but it actually just adds visual clutter. And you can actually see it says home there, which is actually I think a description of where you are within the app. Either way, it's kind of confusing because is it clickable, is it not, is it a navigation prompt, or is it just decoration? You really want to try and keep your screen as clean and clear as possible. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the UI because that's kind of Android design and actions territory, and I don't want to step on their toes too much. But if we switch to the giant phone, if we're really lucky, the giant phone will be working. Excellent. So you can see they've got this distinctive UI on the screen. It's got the this bright green, almost sort of similar sort of coloring to HTC Sense's UI from at least a couple of years ago when I last looked at it. You've got sort of the pseudo action bar here along the bottom, and they've sort of put the time in that as well, which makes sense, but it's also kind of redundant because I have the time on the top of my phone up here as well. So it's kind of like I'd rather see the overflow menu here down along the bottom here where it should be, where it kind of belongs on Android. Otherwise it just makes it a bit confusing. Otherwise what we've got here along the bottom is effectively your tabs. So each of these, and again this is a little bit confusing because we've combined the concepts of an action with the concepts of navigation. So things like hitting the moon button effectively puts you to sleep. So that's an action, fair enough. Hitting the bar brings up the activity for being able to monitor your previous sleeps. And so it gets a little bit confusing because what's an action, what's a navigation? It should be a little easier, particularly for users. You want to make sure users know what to expect whenever they're pressing something on your UI. So making that a little more predictable, perhaps using something similar to Android. And in particular in this layout, they've used something that looks like an action bar, but it almost feels like they're trying to cheat. So one of the big pieces of feedback we often have is that you're not supposed to have tabs along the bottom. And I'm sure the explanation here is, well, they're not tabs, right? It's an action bar. You're allowed to have an action bar along the bottom. And it's true, you are, but only as sort of the second half of a split action bar, and we don't have anything along the top here. So I'd much rather like to see this flipped around so that the action bar sits on the top. You've got navigation on the left, you've got actions on the right, and it's a lot clearer as to exactly how it all is supposed to work. So here, like again, we go through, you hit plus, it lets you set an alarm as to when you want to wake up, or you can just have a nap, which is nice. And then sort of I'm not going to go into too much detail on the UI in the interests of time, but kind of the key is here when you press the go button. And it's going to start recording my sleep. And it's going to use a variety of sensors in order to do that and give me an indication of how good a night's sleep I have, which is nice. That's basically the whole purpose. But what I think is kind of, again, confusing here is that we have an overflow icon, which I'm covering slightly. Where am I? So you've got this overflow icon and sort of unpredictable behavior. So if I click this, it's going to bring up sort of this contextual menu bar, which is not really what I'm expecting. It's kind of a dialogue where I'm expecting a pop-up overflow menu. The things which we've got here to set are all fair enough. It's just, again, the way that it behaves. And if we leave this screen long enough, it'll all turn off and go dark, which again is nice. You can see here dimming screen, touch, or back to return. And so this is good because it means that the phone can stay on, and if it wants to use sensors, it's going to have to stay active while I'm asleep. So it's really important here that it does this, which is nice. We hit back, it automatically records everything, which is good. So otherwise, it works well. It does what it's intended to do. But I think really the key for this app is all about tweaking the UI, making the navigation and the actions a little bit easier, a little bit more obvious. Otherwise, great information around statistics, well displayed as well. I really like their use of graphs and tables to try and make this information as easily consumed as possible. Now, I didn't get a chance to check to see if they have a tablet app. I'm hoping that they do, because again, this is a great example where you're going to use the phone to do the actual recording. It would be great to be able to sit down on your couch at your table with the tablet app and really dig deep into the statistics and the analysis on a bigger screen. So hopefully the developer is watching and they can let us know, or possibly some of the other viewers can let us know just as easily. Let's move on. Let's have a look at Circle Alarm. So Circle Alarm is kind of a simpler concept. This is basically just an alarm clock which is going to let you set alarms in as an intuitive and simple and fast method as possible. And it's actually, surprising or unsurprisingly enough, quite similar to the redesign of the Android clock in the latest Jelly Bean release. Now we can see here that they've done a great job with their feature graphic. Big, bold, gives you a stylized indication of what the app is. Their feature graphic mirrors what they've got here for their icon, which again is a beautiful, distinctive silhouette. So straight away the app looks really nice when you land on it on Google Play. Gives you that professional feeling. So they've done a really good job there. And if we actually move on to the app itself, you can see that they've maintained that sort of professional feel throughout. They've got the hollow styling, everything works the way you should do. And in fact, if we go to the giant phone, and I'll pop it up, you can see that, again, it's this sort of minimalist, simplistic approach to UI design. We've got an action here. If we hit plus, that lets us, it adds a new alarm, which is then, if we click into it, you kind of get to the key, the magic part of the app, which is being able to set an alarm just by dragging these circles around. Which these days, now that the Google built-in clock works along the same lines with these sorts of circular affordances to be able to set time, it's something that's quite familiar and quite intuitive. So I think they've done a pretty good job here. I'm not going to go into too much depth because it's a fairly straightforward app in terms of what it's trying to do. It doesn't have quite the same depth as the other apps that we're looking at, but they've executed it in a really nice way. They've put all of the information front and center. As soon as you sort of touch anything, you get immediate feedback as to what it's doing. When the alarm is set, how often, what ringtone you want to use is all put in one place, making it a really simple, easy to get started app. And I think that's something which the other two apps which we're looking at today can sort of take something away from. They have a much more complicated set of functionality, but that doesn't mean that the use has to be equally as complicated. In fact, the best apps offer a lot of functionality, but don't make you feel like you have to learn it first. And that's one of the big pieces of feedback we saw from the community, as well as our own review of Tasker last week. Fantastic app, passionate users who really, really love what's going on there, but the learning curve of trying to figure out how to use it is putting people off. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people who watched the show last week, and Android Design in Action, which looked at one of the redesigns. Really resonated this idea of trying to make it simpler, trying to make it easier. And I think that's what a lot of people want, is these apps that they love to use, these services which they find hugely useful, but they want to have it be easy to use, to be sort of more of a magical experience where you're not learning a piece of software, you're just taking advantage of a service. So I'm rushing through today's shows because I want to try and keep it a little more succinct than perhaps we sometimes do. So let's have a look at the next app. So this is Sleep Recorder. And you can see here, no feature graphic, which is a real shame. Without a feature graphic, you can't be featured. You don't have a chance of being in the pure Android collection either. And really, the biggest thing here is that you're going to be limiting your downloads. So the lack of a feature graphic on a landing page actually has a significant impact on the number of people who are likely to download it. And it's not only that, but the quality of the feature graphic. So if getting lots of downloads is something that's important to you, it's important to have that feature graphic and for it to be good. Now this is an app which spends a lot of time on design. They've used a skeuomorphic design, which you'll see in a moment. So clearly look and feel is something that's important. So it's really an opportunity here to take that same attention to detail which you have within your app and put it here front and center, which is basically your advertising to the world, your first point of impression. We always say that first impressions are really important, and that's exactly what you're talking about on the landing page in Google Play, is trying to make a first impression which is going to make people want to use your app. In terms of the icon, you can see it's okay. It's kind of the rounded square image which we're trying to move away from. So again, this may be an opportunity to think about how to make this into something which is a little more distinctive, more of a silhouette rather than sort of an image painted on a rounded square canvas. If we look at the app itself, you can see that they've gone for a very skeuomorphic design. It looks a lot like a tape recorder, basically, with sort of a record, playback, and fast forward affordances in the middle. You've got this analog indication of your sleep patterns, effectively. So it looks kind of like an EKG mixed with a tape recorder, sort of a lie detector vibe almost. And I guess that's what it puts me in the mind of when I look at it. Is just kind of looks like a lie detector for my sleep. So you definitely feel judged, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So it is a recorder. It looks like a recorder, so it's definitely on the right track there. They have taken a skeuomorphic design approach, which is quite in contrast to the first app that we looked at, which was much more of a sort of a clean, hollow-based theme. And really, I'm not making a judgment call on this. I think that both are valid options. Really, what I'm trying to judge here is whether or not their design choices are making it easier for me as a user to get started and use that app. And to be honest, with this app, I struggled a little bit. So if I switch to the giant phone, here we go. Oh, sleep recorder has stopped. So that's not a good sign. I'm not going to report it right now, but I will hopefully be able to go back and record that for you. So again, rate us, like Sleep Recorder, soliciting 5-star reviews and ratings. Not great, kind of obnoxious. I understand that you want people to rate and review your app, and there are certainly ways to do that, but this is the second or third time that I've launched the app. It feels like this is maybe not the right time, particularly because when I'm going to be launching this the first few times is likely to be when I'm getting ready for bed in order to record my sleep. I don't want to be interrupted with anything which isn't sort of key to that. And so this is perhaps something which you would display later while you're sort of viewing the analysis rather than at the point in time where you really don't have any time to spare. So I'm going to say no thanks. And you can see everything's moving around. So we've got this beautiful skeuomorphic design. We've got needles bouncing around. We've got rotary dials which I can turn. And what I like about it is that it's simple. There's no overflow button. There's a very limited number of things you can do, and everything that I press has an immediate reaction. Now, where I'm a little bit less thrilled is that it's not obvious what any of the things that I'm touching do. So I can turn this and it's going to change my delay from 1 to 30, but I don't know what that delay is for or what the units are. So I'm a little bit at a loss. Like, I can change it, but I don't know what it does. And again, I can dial this around and it changes the color on the dial, but I don't know what I'm doing. So it's kind of a cool effect, but in terms of feedback, it's underplayed. It's a little too simplistic. It's perhaps relying on me understanding what the analog equivalents of this design are in order to be able to understand it. So here I would try and make it a little bit more obvious to users who are going to open it for the first time to understand, what are these things doing? How am I supposed to use them? So the one thing which I am familiar with is the record button. So I hit record because that's what you do. In fact, if I was going to take my tape recorder analogy to its maximum, I'd hit record and play at the same time. But in any case, I hit record and it pops up with a modal dialogue of all things telling me that I'm holding it wrong. If I want to start, I don't press record, I press the button in the middle, which is a little bit confusing because, well, clearly if this is a tip, why not? Why not make it so that the record button is the way that you start it? And I'm sure that there is a reason for it, and in fact what I have determined is that I think basically these buttons along the bottom are navigation tabs. So hitting record is how I go into recording mode, and hitting play is how I go into the playback tab. So it's basically tabs as indicated by the depression of the buttons. So I go from playback to record, and then clearly I'm already in record, so if I hit record again, that's why I get the dialogue. So the fact that there is a dialogue tells me that enough users are doing this that perhaps this particular paradigm isn't working for you. And that's, I think, one of the risks when you're using something skeuomorphic is that you really want to be careful, because the record button means start recording. That's how it works on the analog device which you are creating a design around. So as soon as you create a design that looks the same as a real world object, but actually the behavior is different, then it gets really confusing. So that's something you want to avoid. And in this instance, I think fundamentally, hitting record should start the recording. So maybe rework the way that those tabs have been implemented to make it a little bit more obvious. Particularly because the analogy between fast forward and favorites, I like the alliteration, that's cool, but it's not necessarily obvious. So it's a design which really means that you have to click everything on the screen before you know what anything on the screen does. And so that's just increasing that learning curve. It means that before I can decide whether or not I want to use this particular app, of which there are several other apps which do the same thing, I need to learn the whole thing first. So something which works much more like the fitness tracking apps that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, like Endomondo. You start it up, and big button, big play button right in the middle of the screen. I hit that and it starts recording. I don't have to have learned anything else. I don't need to record anything. It's just going to start doing exactly what I expect it to do. And then I can figure out how the rest of it works further down the track. And so that's kind of the approach that you want to take for anything like this, particularly these sleep apps, which are going to, like I say, they're going to be used when you're ready for bed. You don't want to have to spend a lot of time learning how the app works right before you use something like this to monitor your sleep. So if we go back to the recording tab and hit record, again, another modal dialogue. Modal dialogues are possibly going to be one of the next topics I look at on table flip. They drive me crazy. Modal dialogues really don't belong in any operating system since somewhere in the mid to early 90s. If you want to display information to users, there's a bunch of ways that you can do that, and there's really very, very few options or very few times when you need to pop up something which blocks their progress in the app. It's really something which should only be done by system dialogues, essentially, to say, hey, you can no longer interact with anything else because of this reason. I'm going to display this alert. So for this, providing a tip, it's a good tip. You definitely need to make sure that your device is connected to the battery, connected to power before you use it, but there's probably better ways to present that information than in a modal dialogue. So I hit OK, eventually, and okay, so now I can see that the delay was a countdown timer in seconds before it started recording. So I guess the idea there is you hit record and then you can, put it next to your bed or expect that you're going to read for another 20 minutes or whatever else. Or maybe you just know that you fidget for the first 15 minutes of sleep and you really don't want to record anything until after that. So that's what what that toggle is. Now what's not 100% clear now is whether or not it's actually started recording. Now from my experiments earlier on, it wasn't. I thought that at this point the countdown had finished, it was recording, but then there was nothing in my history. So I think it was recording. But see, now the countdown is like a minute. So it's, again, the theme around this app is basically this, is that it's hard for me to understand what it's doing quickly. And most users aren't going to take the time to sit down and really learn your app front to back before they decide whether or not they want to use it. They're going to have downloaded this, plus 3 or 4 of your competitors, and they're going to run through them really quickly to see which one looks the nicest and provides the functionality that they want. So you really want to try and reduce that learning curve as much as you can. So let's see, again, if I want to switch tabs, and it's telling me that I have to stop the recording before I can listen to other recordings. Which makes me think that what this is actually recording while I'm sleeping is not movement so much as actually the noise while I'm in bed, which is an interesting take. So I guess we've got 2 apps which look at things a different way. One which is using sensors to determine your sleep, and the other which is using audio. Or perhaps they're both using audio. I should probably have checked that more closely. And really it doesn't matter. Either way, whether you're recording sort of movement or whether you're recording audio, it's the same principles apply to all of the apps. It's just which sensor hardware you happen to be using in order to record things. And I think a great app would actually use all of the sensors, everything that you've got on the device, to sense everything that is changing while you are sleeping. So I can stop the recording. I can go back here. And again, so this is, again, kind of confusing because there is no recording, even though I thought that I had been recording. And again, there's a couple of UI tweaks here. We've kind of got this iPhone-y style buttons, navigation up the top, which is, again, a little bit counter to what we expect. In particular here, it's a little disconcerting because you've got this pure skeuomorphic design on the bottom and then sort of an iPhone design up the top, it gets just, again, it's just a confusing thing for users. So I think, you know, as useful as the app is, the biggest thing, the best thing that they can do here is kind of think about how that onboarding, that on-ramping is for users. You know, how are you going to get them to really understand how to use the app and see how beautiful and simple it is without having to spend a lot of time learning the things which are hidden. So, one of the things that you're going to need to learn if you want to build an app like this, certainly the first app is around sensors. So motion sensors is something which we have a developer guide for on developer.android.com. You're also going to want to look at how to use the microphone for apps like the last app that we looked at to be able to take in that input and then do the analysis on that. So all of that information is available on developer.android.com for sensors. In fact, for all sensors, both mics and motion and light and all kinds of things. So I think all of which would be really useful to create a great app like this. Anchor, Tim, and Tony did a great presentation on the sensitive side of Android at Google I/O last year. So you should definitely check that out. And they've done some really clever things with all the different sensors to be able to create really inventive ways to monitor things. Things like, I think Tony actually put together a heart rate monitor based on audio input. So it's kind of crazy, but these are the sorts of things that you can use. And I would really love to see apps like these taking that to the next step so that you're recording everything, turning all of the sensors on for something like sleep analysis to determine, am I moving? Are there noises? Are there light changes? All of these things are able to be determined with your phone. In fact, you can even record changes in barometric pressure on some of the newer devices. So then you can create a really rich idea of exactly what is happening to your environment while you're sleeping and create a really rich analysis for sort of your at-home sleep recording purposes. So, before we sign off, let's have a quick look at our prescriptions for each of the apps, and you'll see that there's a lot of similarities in what I'm asking for here. So for the first app, for Sleep as Android, think about a more standard action bar, simpler navigation, standardized settings, and just make the whole thing easy to understand and get started. For Sleep Recorder, I think, again, you kind of need a little bit of a UI overhaul. It doesn't need to be completely redesigned. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be using a skeuomorphic design. I think that adds a certain simplicity that works quite well. But I found it really hard to understand how to get going. And I think that's something that could really benefit and help increase your user engagement, particularly things around the modal dialogues. As soon as you find that you need to tell your users that they're doing something wrong, that's usually a pretty clear indication that perhaps you haven't created it in a way that they find intuitive. And overall, just make the whole thing easy to understand. In terms of Circle Alarm, I haven't given any specific advice there. I think you've done a really great job. It looks really nice, provides simple functionality that works really well. So, nice work on that. So, that is all for today, the quick solo version of the App Clinic. Don't forget to tune in to Roman, Nick, and Adam for Android Design in Action on Tuesday. Hopefully they'll be setting their design skills loose on some of the apps that we looked at today after a really popular session last week where they looked at redesign for Tasker. A couple of announcements for the Android developer team. We have embraced the new communities on Google+. So there is an Android development and an Android design community, both available from the Android Developers Plus page on Google+. These communities are really for you guys. We've created them as a place that's kind of supposedly semi-official. You can create your own communities and be part of that, which is awesome. In this community, we're going to do some light moderation just to try and keep the spam down, try and make sure that it's a friendly environment for everyone to be a part of. But it's really your community, and it is whatever you guys make of it. So participate, take part, let us know how you would like to see it shaped, and we'll see what we can do to help move things in that direction. We also have a developer survey currently ongoing at bit.ly/Android Dev Survey. So if you're an Android developer, designer, product manager, distribution engineer, basically if you have any impact at all, if you're in any way associated with building Android apps, we would love to hear from you. Get some of your feedback on the things that we've been doing, some of the assumptions that we have, so that we can help build better tools, better products for you guys to have a successful Android experience. Now, next week there will be no app clinic. We are all going off to an offsite in Carmel on late on Friday, so we're going to be preparing for that rather than preparing for the show. We will be back with, I think, at least one more episode before Christmas for those of you who haven't disappeared on your own Christmas vacations. And we're not 100% sure what we're going to do, so hit up the Trello board and basically vote for the apps that you'd like us to look at. I think the two top trending categories right now are, I think, book readers and what was the other one, Dan? I can't remember.
I think it was remote control apps.
Remote control apps, that's right. So book readers and remote control, they're the two top categories at the moment. We're going to go with whichever one has sort of the most votes for the top apps in those categories. So if you have a strong opinion, do jump in there. And if you have an app in that category, definitely go to Trello, self-nominate your app. We'd love to do self-nominations and then work with the developers who we talk to on the App Clinic to help you guys build your apps, make them even better. And the top ones we're going to put into our own pure Android collection. Now we have 3 nominees for apps to appear in pure Android. We're going through the details now, making sure that we're happy with them, and hoping to launch that again before Christmas. So we'll hopefully have more information about that for you soon. So until then, enjoy the lead up to the holiday period. Happy building more apps, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Reto Meier, and this has been the App Clinic.